Welcome to a very special episode of Mysteries Unknown. In tonight's podcast, I've got Darrell Denton with me, and I'm really excited to have him on the podcast tonight. We're going to be talking about his very first Bigfoot encounter while he was out hunting on his grandfather's property, and this Bigfoot creature walked out of the woods, walked right up next to him, showed him his teeth, and screamed at him. Really scary encounter. But then we're going to be talking about later on the podcast some encounters he had with Martin Groves, some Dogman encounters, a lot of different cool stuff. Very scary Class A encounters. We're going to be getting into all of that. But before I do, I just want to say thank you so much for being here and being part of this podcast. I couldn't do it without you. If you've got a mystery or an encounter you want to send me, you can send it to me by email at mysteriesunknownpodcast@gmail.com. But let's jump right into the story. Darrell, welcome to the show, man.
Well, thank you, man. Thank you very much. Honored to be here.
Well, man, I'm very excited to have you here, and I can't wait to get into all these encounters, but why don't you take us back to your very first encounter that happened to you on your grandfather's property and walk us through that?
Sure, man. I'll be glad to do that. Long story short, my grandfather had a big farm, very rural. It was in Cannon County, Tennessee. Of course, I grew up in Tennessee, and I stayed with my grandfather most all the time when my parents worked in Nashville. It was about 100 miles away. So I pretty much lived with my granddad and my grandma till I was school age, and then I would, of course, be at school. And we lived about 45 miles from Nashville, our home was, and I knew that farm really well. I've been all over it except real deep. There's a part of that my grandfather, the closest house to him was probably mile and a half from him. It's way out in the middle of nowhere. There's just gravel roads. There's no paved roads, or they're just gravel. And it was very remote. My granddad did not have a car in his whole entire life. When I was a kid growing up, we hooked 2 mules up, took a wagon to town for groceries. So, my granddad was old school. At the time my incident happened, he was 92 years old, and he was fit as anybody 30 years younger his age. He farmed all his life, and I grew up in a tobacco field and a hay field or the garden with my granddad, or plowing behind a mule and a plow. So I learned a lot from my granddad. He was real honorable and well thought of through the whole entire county. But anyway, me and 3 of my friends, Cody, Jason, and Scott, I deer hunted with them for a long time on my grandfather's farm. We would go up the week of black powder season, which is we call muzzleloader in Tennessee, and it's always the week before regular gun season opens, and you can only kill 1 deer, and of course it's a single shot. If anybody doesn't understand what a black powder rifle is, it's like the old-fashioned ramrod with the whole works at that time. They make them a little different now, but anyway, we'd go up the week before. My grandfather had tons of deer, and what land he didn't have, all the adjoining neighbors that knew him, we were welcome to hunt there too on their property. They had nobody hunting over there. And we had a large area that we covered. There's probably 4 or 5 miles right there that we had to hunt on. And we all went in different directions. And this particular year, I'd taken my camper up like I normally do, or pull behind my truck camper, the good-sized camper. We'd set it up next to my grandfather's barn, and of course he had electricity. We'd plug it up, and we'd have TV set up outside, and we'd grill out, and we'd spend a whole week up there. Actually, about 8 days, because we'd get there before the opening week of muzzleloader, and we'd scout out. And we already had stands in the woods built, but then again, we had some carry-on stands if we wanted to hunt in a different area. And this particular time, all my buddies, we got up there and got set up, and they followed me in their truck with a trailer, and we all had ATVs on it. And we were all ready to go, and everybody hit out. And as soon as we had gotten there, I went up and spoke to my granddad, and everybody went out in the direction and got their stuff ready for the next morning. This was on a Sunday, opened up on Monday morning, and they went out to find their spot, and we'd all meet back. And I went up on my grandfather's back porch, and I said, I want a trophy deer this time. I'm not looking for meat or just a deer. I want a trophy. And I said, where'd be the best place to go, Granddad? Because we always got a deer every year, all of us did. There was so many deer on his property, but I was looking for that big buck. And he pointed over behind his house and he said, "You see that third hollow with over there? We call hollows big hills with bottoms in them." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, that's where I would go. That my old home place is there, and you've been there when you were little. And there's remnants of the old log home that's fell in, and you'll see the tin roof down there. It's on the other side of a creek. There's a clearing there, but there's always a lot of big deer down there." And I said, "Okay, I've never been there before." So there's part of an old grist mill down from there too that'd been gone way years before he lived there too. But big rocks were there, and it was a good sized creek that ran all year round. About 12 foot wide, but a good, 2 foot deep, good running cool water. And I hit it over there, and you had to cross a fence. I went down behind my grandfather's house, and you opened the gate. You crossed about a 200-yard wide fenced in, barbed wire fenced in area that his cows ran. And there was a lot of sage grass in there that time of year, and it's just dead looking tall grass. And you come to about a 7 foot barbed wire fence, you climb over it, and you go up the hillside. I'm talking about steep hills, like 45-degree angles straight up. And I had to cross three of those. And the time I got to the third one and went down the hillside from it, which was about a 45-minute to an hour walk from my grandfather's backside of his home. And I got over there and I walked down to the bottom and I could see the creek he was talking about. And I walked around the edge of the creek and you could see a game trail on both sides, a lot of deer tracks in it. And I could see what was left of the old home place. It was fallen in, but you could see part of the tin roof and the chimney still standing. So I knew I was in the right spot. And looked around for a tree on the left side of that creek there, and I found a tree, and I had a climbing stand on it, and I put it around the tree and got it ready for the next morning, climbed up in the tree and cut a few limbs off and had the view from where I was at, came back down and went across the creek and looked around, and I found all kinds of deer tracks, and there was a real good game trail on the other side of it. A lot of acorns that year, a lot of acorns. They were everywhere, and there was a big limb off of a big oak not far from that spot where all those tracks were. And I had a drag rag on my boot on the way in, which is like a little elastic strap that goes around your boot, and it's got a cloth on it, and it has a scent on it, which kind of covers the human scent, but it kind of also draws in the male deer, the buck. And I hung that up on that, jumped up and grabbed that limb. It was about 8 foot off the ground, and pulled it down and tied that rag to it and let it go. And gonna let it kind of filtrate down that hollow till the next morning, hopefully draw something in. And headed back across the creek and went up that big 45-degree hill. Now I'm on the side of a hill or 45 degrees. The trees up on the side of the hill, so I'm kind of overlooking this clearing across the creek, even though I'm not, but it looks that way because the way the 45-degree roughly angle was. Went on back to my grandfather's house and went out to my buddies, and we grilled out that night and had a big time watching Sunday night football on TV. And told my granddad, "Wake me up when you get up." And he said, "I will," because it was a good walk over there. And my granddad always get up somewhere between 4 and 5. And that morning he knocked on the side of the camper and he said, "Boy, time to get up." My granddad always called me boy. He never called me by my name. My whole life I lived with him. And I headed that way. And went down behind his house and through that gate behind his house, across that sage field, and started climbing over that barbed wire fence going up this first hill. And I don't know, I'd made probably 5 or 6 steps up that hill, and I heard something walking to the left of me. And it kind of caught my attention because I knew there would be nobody hunting in there because all my buddies, I knew where they were at. They were all in different directions a long way from me. And I knew my granddad wouldn't let nobody hunt in there if we were there. But it sounded like somebody walking, like a person. And when I stopped, it stopped. And I listened a bit and shined my flashlight and didn't see anything. And went on up the top of the hill, and I could still hear it walking occasionally to the left of me. I was a little bit alarmed, thinking, that's kind of sounds like a person. And anyway, I got on over to the second hill and the third hill and come down the bottom of it. And I was a little unfamiliar with that area because I'd never been there, and I was shining my flashlight. I found my stand on the left. I just followed around the side of that creek and found the stand, and I kind of, on the way down to the stand there, I heard it again on top of the hill I just come down. It sounded like somebody walking through the leaves. And I stopped and shined my flashlight up in that area and didn't see anything. And I didn't hear it anymore. It stopped. And I kind of hurriedly got into my tree stand. And with those climbing stands, you have to put the thing on your feet and then you climb up, sit back in it. And I got up probably about 25, 28 feet off the ground. I like to hunt up pretty high. I was on a really good tree and I leaned back and got set up and I could still hear something off to the left, up behind me to the left of me. And it finally just went away. I didn't hear it anymore, but I don't know what time of morning this was. It was still dark, but I got set in the tree and it's got a little bar in front of the stand. You pull up and it has a camo cover that goes about the bottom of your chin all the way down. It covers your body up. And I had my gun laid it. I had it tied to a little rope down the tree and I pulled it up and set it in the stand against that bar. And, I had all my stuff behind me. I had a fanny pack up there, which I had a powder horn and some extra Hornady bullets in. And then I had my lunch hanging on a little limb up there and I had my binoculars hanging on the limb. And all of it in close distance reaching range. And I was ready to hunt. And it was really quiet and I didn't hear anything else. And then about daylight, I noticed that there was fog on the creek in front of me and I couldn't see across the clearing. It was really foggy that morning. And as the fog cleared, I could see the other side, bits and pieces of it. And before it completely cleared, I started hearing regular animals running around like you always do in the woods, birds and squirrels and everything else. And I was ready to hunt. And it was right around 8 o'clock, I guess, when I looked to the left of me and there was a huge, real thick, tall cane, which grows on the riverbanks in Tennessee or the creeks. It's cane. It's about 14, 15 foot tall. It's real thick and it looks just like a bamboo type stuff. And it grows on a lot of the rivers and creeks around that area. And I looked over in that area and I could see it going all the way down the side of that creek, but I couldn't see around the bend. And I noticed something over there moving a little bit, and out walked 3 deer. And there was a bigger doe in front, and she walked right through the creek, walked up the bank and onto that game trail on the other side of the creek. And right behind her were 2 other small deer. They weren't yearlings. They were probably a year old, but they were still probably with their mother. I was speculating. And they walked on that game trail and they started milling around like deer do, and they were eating acorns, just acting normal, and which was a great sign because I'd found rubs and scrapes down there in that area, and I thought, well, it's a great sign. They're going to bring a buck in. And I watched them for probably 10 or 15 minutes, maybe a little longer, and then all of a sudden I looked and the lead deer, which was the bigger doe, was staring, dead still right at that cane area down that bank somewhere over toward that cane thicket. And the other deer, one to the right and one to the left behind her, they were all 3 just frozen, staring at that area. Well, I'm immediately thinking, well, here comes a big buck. They're looking over there. So there's probably a buck about to come out of there. And all of a sudden, the lead doe, she raises her right foot and paws like 2 or 3 times on the ground like she's trying to get something to move over there. And she raises her nose up and she lets out a real loud sound like somebody sneezing. It's like a blowing sound that deer make. And usually a lot of times that means they're startled by something. And she did that really loud and she was just frozen looking right at that area. And then all of a sudden, for no reason at all, she turned to the right and went running right in front of me on the game trail as fast as she could go down that creek bank, and the other 2 deer following her, and they were running like somebody had shot at them. So I was thinking, well, that's really strange. I've never seen them run like that unless somebody spooked them or they did shoot at them. And I watched them run on off till they disappeared in the wood line down there. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, there must be a massive buck about to come out of this cane area over there, this cane thicket, and all of a sudden I seen this cane thicket moving from the back to the front, and this is real thick. I don't even think a person could walk through that, but I could hear it popping and breaking, and I could see the tops of it moving as something was coming from the front to the back, and it was really swaying it. And I'm thinking, well, this must be the biggest buck that I've ever seen coming out of here. And I watched it all the way to the end as the cane kept waving, as moving because of the pressure it had on the inside of it. And then all of a sudden, this creature steps up. And I'm up in this tree stand looking right down at it, and this thing steps out. And when it stepped out, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I thought, what is, I was trying to figure out what it was because I'd never seen anything like that. And it looked right up toward me, and then it took one step and jumped completely across the creek and landed on the game trail, one leap, and walked down right in front of me and got dead on straight in front of me. Now, I'm probably by the top of that tree a little further, but straight down, I'm probably 50 or 60 feet from this thing. But I'm up overlooking it, and this thing looks right at me, and it knew exactly where I was at. It looked right at me, and it showed me its teeth first. Well, by this time, I'm thinking, what is this? I've never seen anything like this. I remember I was probably, I don't scare very easy, but that was probably the scariest I've ever been in my life. And when this thing growled next, it growled looking right at me with its eyes. It didn't take its eyes off of me. I thought, well, this thing's about to jump this creek and come over here and just pull me out of this tree. I don't know what this thing's going to do. And I watched it, and about that time, I'm thinking, should I fire on this thing? Should I shoot it? And I'm thinking, well, I got one shot with a 50 caliber muzzle loader, and I don't believe that's going to take this big creature down, and I might just make it worse than it could be. So I was pretty much at the point at that time that when it walks over, a little past there, reaches up and grabs that drag rag off of that limb and pulls it down and smells of it. And then it just rips the whole tree limb out of the tree. And it wasn't a massive tree limb. It was probably 3 or 4 inches at the base where it went into the wood, but it was still a pretty scary thing when I seen it just tear the whole limb out and throw it on the ground. And it walks right back to where it's at, and it's staring at me again. And it was the ugliest, meanest looking thing I've ever seen. I remember just trying to breathe. I was just trying to breathe. I was like, this thing's going to kill me. And its mouth on the right side was kind of out of contortion. It was very strange looking. I'd never seen anything like this. And then it looks at me, and it's probably stared at me a good 3 or 4 minutes, and then it lets out this scream that I've never heard since. And, Ron Moorhead's a super close friend of mine, and we researched together, and I've never heard a scream like that. And it was like a scream turning into a howl at the end. It was the craziest, loud, and it echoed all down that hollow. Well, by this time, I'm thinking, this is it. This thing's coming across, and, it's getting me out of this tree. And it looked at me a minute or two more, and then it just turns, and it walks away from me. I'm watching it. It stops one time, and it turns like this and looks back at me in the tree. And then it just continues to walk off, and I watched it walk between the beech trees as it finally just went out of sight. And as soon as I seen what was left of the top of its head, the heck were climbing down this tree stand. I lowered that bar, and I grabbed my gun, left everything else there, and jumped out of the top of this tree. And I'm 25, 28 feet up in this tree. And when I hit the ground, it was on that 45-degree angle. I hit all those leaves, and I slid all the way down into the creek. And jumped up on my gun, looked across the creek, and ran up the side of that hill. And I ran faster than I've ever run. And I remember by the time I crossed the top of that first hill, I was going down and almost halfway up the second hill. I looked back on the hill behind me. I kept looking to make sure this thing wasn't coming after me. And when I looked back on the hill, there it stood. It was watching me run. Now, I don't know if it was the same one or a different one, but it was one that looked like it. And it was standing up there next to a tree watching me run. So all that did was kick my adrenaline in a little worse, and I just ran faster. And by the time I got over the last hill, I'm headed toward that barbed wire fence at the bottom, and I done made my mind up. I'm not stopping to climb this fence. I'm jumping it. And I'm running as fast as I can. I look back, I didn't see the thing, and I jumped this barbed wire fence, and it caught the left pants leg and ripped my pants all the way up past my knee and cut a huge gash in the side of my leg with that barbed wire. I didn't even know that. I was still running. I cleared the fence, but by the time I got through the sage grass, about 200 yards of that field, looking back continuously, kept on and got through my grandfather's gate. I ran up on his back porch and opened the door up and ran in and shut the screen door and put the little hook on it and then shut the big door and locked it. And I'm looking out the window to make sure this thing's not coming. And I'm so out of breath and just absolutely terrified. I run into the right part of the kitchen there, and I run into the living area, and I sat down behind this big old huge potbelly stove my granddad had in between the corner and the center of the room, and wood burning stove. And I sat down behind it on the floor, and I was so out of breath, couldn't even talk. My granddad was sitting there in his rocking chair looking at me, and he goes, "Boy, what's wrong with you?" And I couldn't talk. I said, I was just so out of breath and I'd run so much. And he said, "You look like you've seen a ghost." And I said, "I can't talk, Granddad. I got to get my breath." And I got up and looked out the window and went back to the kitchen and made sure this thing wasn't coming. And come and sat back down again, finally caught my breath. And he goes, "What has happened?" And I told him, I said, "Man, I seen a monster in the woods." And he said, "A monster?" He said, "I've lived here all these years. Ain't no monsters in the woods." And I said, "What I seen was a monster." And he said, "What did it look like?" And I told him, and he looked at me and he goes, "Oh, you seen the woodbooker." I said, "A woodbooker?" I said, "You have never told me anything about any woodbooker, and I've been with you all my life." And he goes, "Well, didn't want to frighten you. I've seen them 4 times in my lifetime. I've seen them watching me work, seen them 4 times up close." He said, "They don't bother you. They're just territorial. If you're in their area," I should have told you. I should have figured there might have been one over in there. But, yeah, they just territorial. He just scared you, run you out of there. And I said, "This thing wanted to kill me, I'm telling you." He said, "Well, it didn't." And he said, "I didn't want to tell you about it because I didn't want you to be frightened and not be able to go in the woods and camp and everything else." I'm going to plug my phone in here. But he said, "It's just a wood booger, nothing to worry about. Nothing to worry about at all." And anyway, he was a lot more nonchalant about it than I was. I had a pretty crazy feeling about this thing. And he knew exactly what it was. And, he had a good reason for not telling me, but it wasn't a good enough reason for me. But anyway, he said in the wintertime, they get hungry, and he said they come to the hen house, and my granddad had a big old hen house right behind to the left of his back porch, and it had probably 100 chickens in it. He said they come here because he sold eggs. He had a little stand out there on the gravel road. People come by and pay for his eggs, and he said they'll come in the wintertime, they'll take a couple of chickens, and they'll leave a little pile of rocks and sticks like they're paying for it. And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Nothing to worry about, boy. I just didn't want you to know because I didn't want you not to hunt in the woods and camp in the hayloft and camp out with your friends and your cousins." And that was my first encounter, and it was took me a lot of years to get over that. For a matter of fact, I probably had nightmares for the first month or two after that. I never hunted him. I didn't tell. I went down and told my friends. They came back, and they come back from hunting. One of them, Scott, had a big buck that he killed. Only one of them had a deer, but they had it in a tree out there skinning it out. And I went down and said, "Guys, we've been hunting up here 5, 6 years now. You ever seen anything in the woods that looked kind of different. And they said, "What are you talking about?" They all call me Big D. And I said, "Well, kind of like a Bigfoot looking thing." And they said, "What are you talking about? You had too much to drink last night." And I said, "I didn't drink anything last night." And they said, "Well, I don't know what you've seen, but we ain't never seen anything like it. I just kind of let it go. I didn't say anything else about it." But I went up there with them a few more years after that, but I didn't hunt. They went hunting. I stayed in the house with my granddad. And I didn't hunt I didn't hunt in the woods for 7 years. I would go out in my truck, park in the field, and, hunt on the farm out of my truck or something, but I didn't go in the woods. So it was definitely life changing.
Well, Darrell, I don't blame you for not going out in the woods. I wouldn't either, especially after that thing stopping and looking at you like that. I hear a lot of encounters, and it's either they pass by or they'll walk by you or something like that. But for that thing to stop and show its teeth and scream at you like that, man, that is definitely life changing. And I got a lot of questions to ask you, but obviously the first one is, man, how did that affect the rest of your life? And I know you've had a lot of different encounters and you've seen a lot of stuff, but not knowing really what this thing was and having that first encounter, man, how did that affect you?
Well, it definitely was life changing. If I hadn't I know that first of all, at that time we didn't have internet and we didn't have a cell phone. I didn't have a cell phone. I'm sure somebody did, but in 1992, I didn't have a cell phone. That was November the 6th of 1992. And I don't remember when I got my first phone. It seemed like it was 98 or 99. It was one of those big old huge ones, that was just big with a big old antenna on them that you carried around. But, we didn't have anybody to talk to. There wasn't any groups. There wasn't any radio shows. There wasn't any podcasts like you. You were pretty much on your own. You really couldn't even tell anybody. And if you told people, they all looked at you like you're either lying or telling making up some kind of story, or there was no outlet. There wasn't any. And fortunately enough, my 7 months later, roughly, my closest friend at that time was Martin Groves, and he and I were just really close. And he came in one morning, he took off for about a week. He went turkey hunting over here up at the LBL, him and Harry, a buddy of his, that turkey hunted together. And he and I had a lot of conversations about it over the years, his encounter and my encounter, because I didn't know anybody else that had an encounter like we had. His was different than mine. His was with a Dogman type creature, but mine was with a Bigfoot. And, I was elected an official. I've been elected, I think I ran 7 times and won 7 times. And I didn't want people to think I'd lost my absolute mind, talking about seeing some kind of monster in the woods. And Martin, being a chief deputy sheriff, he didn't want people to think he was crazy either. But we didn't have an outlet. But I went to my only option at that time was the library. And I went to the library and tried to find pictures of Bigfoot. And finally, after research 3 or 4 of them, I found a book that said the 10 type Bigfoot, 10 different types of Bigfoot. And I don't recall the name of the book, but I remember finding it. And surprisingly, the number 2 picture in there was called a woodbugger. Number 2 Bigfoot woodbugger. And it looked identical what I seen, except it didn't have red eyes. This one had red eyes in the picture. The one I seen had brown eyes. And I've never seen another woodbugger since then. I've seen what I call a type 3 or 4 that was in that type picture, and a type 6 that look a little more like the patty, more like Bigfoot. And then the one that had the dome crest, the number 6 one they called it. But I've seen those types since then.
That is wild, man. That's definitely life changing, and it's fortunate that you had Martin to talk to, and his encounter is wild as well. But that's one of the reasons I started this podcast, is to give people a safe place to share these encounters, because it helps to get that stuff off your chest. But I got to know why you think this thing didn't come up after you, man. What do you think kept you safe that day?
Well, I really had to tend to lead to what my granddad said, because my granddad had been around those creatures, and he had never told me about them. He said, "I'll be working in the field, and I'll look up and want to be standing right there at the fence just watching me work." And, he said, "They're not out to harm you." He said, "As long as you stay out of their territory." They're very territorial, and I know that now from my own experience with them. They are territorial. They have markers. And they don't want you in their area. Maybe I messed up, but maybe he was looking for those deer and I was there messing up his hunt. I don't really know, but it's only my speculation on it. I can only talk about what I've encountered and experienced myself. I'm no expert at nothing except praying to God. So, you know, I, I have to go with what my granddad said. It was territorial. It didn't try to kill me. I didn't think of it that way then. Within the
Yeah.
next year, I started thinking, well, he was right. If it wanted to kill me, it could have. It just wanted to scare me to death, and it done a good job.
It definitely worked, right? It scared you to death for sure, man. And anybody would be scared in that situation. And it sounds like your grandfather was a pretty smart man, and and I can understand why he didn't tell you about it as a kid and as younger. He didn't want you to be scared and take the enjoyment of the woods away from you. And so I totally get that, but I know you've had a lot of different encounters with these creatures and over the years and stuff. And I'd love to hear about your second encounter if you've got time, man. And I know there's a lot to hash out in that first one. One question I do have, did you sense any kind of fear? Did you feel anything other than just obvious fear? But was there any kind of just weird, strange feeling before this thing popped out of the woods?
I've got some kind of ability, and I've had it all my life. When I was a little kid, I had it, and I don't know. My grandmother on my dad's side she was very influential to me, and she was Lakota Sioux Indian, and she always told me that I had special abilities and I had a presence about me that I would understand as I got older, and I had abilities that other people don't, and we could all have those abilities if we practiced them more. And I really never understood what all that meant, but I seen her do some pretty special things when I was growing up. And, I think that it has a lot to do with maybe a little bit of my native blood in me. That's the only thing I could ever come up with because my grandmother had those intuitions. And yeah, I did. I had a real funny feeling that morning. And I did the whole time going into the woods after I heard that step. And it wasn't just the funny feeling that something might be in here. There was that feeling like, I don't feel safe in here, or that kind of feeling. And I've had that feeling numerous times since then in areas that I've been around some, what I call more aggressive type Bigfoot. I've been bluff charged before by one of these things, and they run at you and stop, and they're not really going to tackle you or grab you. They're just trying to scare you to death and keep you away from them because these
Yeah.
creatures are very smart creatures. They're not, regardless of what people think. My personal belief, they're an ancient human. They're not an ape by any means. They're so intelligent. They can outthink a human being. They know your intentions. When you're in the woods, if you got a gun or a camera, you're very lucky that you'll see one because they've lost a lot of members of their family over the years by people shooting at them and firing at them, and they know what a weapon is, and they also have the intelligence to know what your intentions are. I think they can feel your heart. I think if
Yeah.
they think you have a good heart, you're going to have a better chance to see them. If you're there with the intention just to see them and not harm them, your chances might be a little better too. So, to answer that question with a lot of words, I think yes.
I hear a lot of encounters where people, talk about a feeling or something like that. I don't know, as a former law enforcement officer, you develop that sixth sense where you just know when something's wrong or something's going to happen. I don't know how to describe that other than just, a gift maybe God gives you, and certain people listen to it and certain people don't. But especially with all the encounters you've had, you're pretty fortunate to have that. And, you mentioned the bluff charge, man. I'd love to hear about that if you're up to sharing it.
Well, I've been bluff charged several times. Um, the first bluff charge I had was, I'm trying to think what year that was. It was probably early 2000s. I don't remember what year, 3 or 4. I was actually on the Tennessee River. Um, I used to get contacted all the time, and I mean, so many contacts that there was no way I could cover them all. But people would send me messages or call my cell phone at that time. I had a team then of 2 teams actually. There was a total of about 8 or 10 of us, and we would get called about, can you come up to our place? We got some kind of creature here. Can you come up there and tell us what it is? Or some of them say, we got a Bigfoot here. Can you come up here and check it out? Or it was just people trying to find out, information about these creatures. And most of the time that when we went, it was legitimate. They definitely had a family of them, or even just an individual one that was occupying their home area. So that particular time, I was on the Tennessee River, and this gentleman, him and his wife and daughter and son, had led me in there. There was a place off of I-40 called Raccoon Mountain, and I met him there at that particular spot because I didn't know where he was at exactly, and I followed him from there, probably 10 or 12 miles back in those hills to the river. And he told me where to park my truck, and I got out, and he goes, "Now, you don't need to go up in there where those big rocks are. Don't go up there where those big rocks are, because we see 3 or 4 of them come out of that area up there. And at nighttime, they come down, and one or two of them sometimes will look through the window at us into the living room." And I said, "Well, if they wanted to harm you, they would have already done it. They're just curious." I call them watchers and peekers because they like to do that. They're curious. They're not trying to get you. If they were, they would have ripped the door off and come right in. And they're capable of doing that. So, they don't have a problem with that if they wanted to do it. But anyway, he led me down this path. He goes, "I wouldn't go past this tree," he pointed out to, "because they come down to that rock area there. And this guy was scared of it. And, I don't get real fearful. I've been around some that are aggressive, and you don't want to be around them because I think some of these creatures have a tendency that they would hurt you. I think they're like people.
Yeah.
They are. I mean, some people are good, some people aren't. Some people have a little more patience than others. These creatures are the same way. Some of them don't like people at all. So I went down that trail like he told me, and there was a big bluff hanging over like an overhang. And I carried my sleeping bag, and I got up under that overhang, built a little fire, and had a real strong flashlight. He said, "Now they're right up above there. I wouldn't go past that." Well, I was in that area, and I just got settled down there, and I was trying to build a fire, and one of them bluff charged me, come down around the side of this big boulder, and I could hear it coming down, and I wasn't sure if it was a person, this guy that took me back there, or it was a Bigfoot at that particular time. But I kind of walked around the edge of this overhang, and there it stood, and it just took 3 or 4 steps at me, and like it was going to grab me. And I backed up, of course, and then it just backed up a little bit and walked back into the woods. So I've been bluff charged a couple times, and that particular time was in the dark. I had a flashlight, but, it's a whole lot more fearful in the dark. And plus, you don't know if it's a friendly one or one that's aggressive. So I'm like my close friend, Scott Carpenter. Scott Carpenter's been gone a year almost in August, and he was such a good friend and influence to me that I'm like him. I think some of these creatures probably have you on the menu.
I do.
I don't think all of them do. I think there's a lot of good ones too, but I know there's a lot of good ones because I've been around the good ones. But you don't know what you're running into out in the woods. I don't tell anybody to go into the woods anymore by themselves. I used to do it by myself, but I don't do it anymore because there's other creatures out there you may run into. Because the Dogman is real and the Dogman is alive. I've run into those things too, and they're not always friendly.
There's a lot out there that we just don't know about, man. And I spent a lot of time as a young man out in the woods, and I wouldn't anymore, or especially going out there by yourself. And, I agree like you, man. I think you run into the wrong one, you're going to have a bad day, and you run into a good one, you're going to be all right. And, I really want to ask you, because I know that you've really experienced with this world, but what do you think missing 411 has to do with these cryptid creatures? Do you think there's a correlation there with some of the cases? Obviously not all of them, but do you think some of these are missing 411 stuff?
I have to think that it's something to do with some of these cryptids. I know now that there's other cryptids in the woods. Now, I've heard of cryptids that I've never seen before. And I've got numerous people that I personally know have seen this lizard creature. They call it a reptilian. I've never seen one of them, but what I've heard, those things are pretty nasty. And do I think Dogman could be taking people in certain areas? I would say it's a possibility. I wouldn't put it past them because I don't think all those are friendly at all. I've seen 3 close enough to really know they were Dogman, and probably seen more than that. But it's the worst one I ever seen was with Martin Groves in October of 22, which we just done a documentary with Small Town Monsters about that one that came out last week, and that was the strangest thing I've ever seen. Bigfoot, I think some of those could possibly do that also. I know for a fact there's a such thing called a rake or a crawler, because I seen my first one of those in March of this year in Land Between the Lakes with Martin Groves and Barton Nunley. And they also seen it. Martin seen it run up the tree as I did. And there was 2 more with it, and they were making a clicking sound like they were talking to each other. And then we seen another creature I've never seen before the same time or the day before that looked like a bear. Looked like a bear, but it had a head like a kangaroo. And I don't know what that was. It didn't seem aggressive, but it just ran off into the woods. So, yeah, I think there's probably something else present too. I wouldn't completely rule out portals because I mean Scott Carpenter had one of the best pictures of a portal I ever seen that he caught on a trail, and who knows if you step into one of them where you end up at. So
no telling, man.
I don't really know, but I do think that I don't think it's just Dogman and Bigfoot or cryptids doing that, but I think there's probably a presence of something else we don't know about.
Yes, those are some good points, man. There's so much in God's universe we don't understand and we don't know, and it seems like the longer time goes on, the more and more these things start popping up, and it makes you wonder why that is. I would love to know, man, if you want to talk about it, if you can, man, a little bit about that Dogman experience and some of the details with that. I know Dogman is I think they're just pure evil. I've never had a Dogman encounter, but those things are really, really terrifying, man. But if you're up to it, I'd love to hear a little bit about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd never even heard of a Dogman until Martin Groves told me about what had happened to him in '93, and quite frankly, I didn't hear about Dogmen anymore. I don't believe until just in the last 5 or 6 years. But I mean, I was really into the Bigfoot or forest people or Sasquatch world myself. That's really about all I really did on my spare time, besides fish and spend time with my kids. But it was the Dogman is my first experience with a Dogman was just make this quick, and I'll go into what you were asking about. But my first Dogman I ever seen was October of 2021 in Tazewell County, Virginia. And I was there 3 weeks to see that Dogman. And by myself, I would go out in the morning, I'd go out at night in the afternoon and stay till I could see it because the actual gentleman who lived there, his great aunt lived there. It was her farm. Him and his wife and daughter and son lived there with her. And something was killing their goats. And I just run into him by complete accident. He was at a little country store right in the middle of nowhere, and he told me what was going on. And asked me if I knew about them, and I went out there and when I seen the tracks, I knew immediately what they were because I've seen hundreds of Bigfoot tracks and I've seen quite a few Dogman tracks, but I knew it was a dog canine type creature and it wasn't a regular dog. I knew that. The hock was there. The foot was human looking with a hock with claws on it. And I've seen quite a few of those in the LBL. I've seen 2 or 3 different types, but I say that the last night I was there, I finally seen that creature. Galloped across the field like a horse. Didn't run like a dog. It galloped like a horse. And when it got to the fence line right below me where my truck was sitting on an overlook, stood up on 2 legs. It looked like a massive German Shepherd. The head was about 3 times the size of a normal German Shepherd. Looked identical to a black German Shepherd. It stood up. I couldn't see its feet, but I could see its hot legs, and it stepped over the barbed wire fence and went into the wood line. That was my first Dogman. The Dogman that I mentioned that Martin and I seen was a year later. It was the 28th or 29th. Can't remember which one it was. 93 is when his encounter was, but I guess it was the 29th because we went back to the area that Martin had his encounter at, the same area, that he had been attacked by Dogman and what he called either two Bigfoot or two Gugway. He wasn't sure which one they were, but they were out in front of the camp. And we went back to that area, and we were in there 2 days, and the second night we were there, we had just stopped. And if you've ever been to Land Between the Lakes, some people haven't, but I can make it real quick for you. You've got, I think I'm right on this. There's 170,000 acres there, and it's remote as remote can get. And there's tons of old cemeteries there, underwater and above ground. There's old farmhouses that have fallen in, some still standing. The TVA come in there in the 60s and run those people out and took their land, and if they didn't accept it, they just flooded them. So there's a lot of strange. There's no place I go that gives me any stranger feeling than Land Between the Lakes. When I drive in the entrance, my whole demeanor changes. It's just a feeling you get. But that particular area that we were in was the north end of the LBL. And if you go back into the LBL, there's roads for miles and miles. They just never stop. There's gravel roads to the left, gravel roads to the right, dirt roads to the left, dirt roads to the right. A paved one here and there. But, I mean, if you don't know your way around there, you can get lost. But this particular area that I was in, and Martin Groves probably knows that area better than anybody that I know of. He spent a great amount of time over the years listening to people's stories and encounters and people that have been attacked and witnessed Dogman attacks there. And he knows the area as well as anybody that's out there. And we were back on this certain area close to where he had his encounter on Old Gravel Road. And we had just stopped to have a snack. I sat on the tailgate in his truck, and we were just having a snack because we hadn't eaten that day. And it was 12:48 at night, if I remember correctly. And we got back in his truck, and you can't go fast on these roads because there's holes in them and big gullies and you just got to like 1 mile an hour. You're just barely going. And we had just turned on this road, and we're barely moving. I've got my window down. This is October of 22. My window's down the pasture side. Martin's driving. And we come to this spot where there's a big ravine to the right, a creek bed, and there's a culvert coming out of that, and it's weeds and things grow up around it. And I look down, and there's like this blue mist. Looks like a blue mist above the ground all in that area. And then all of a sudden, the blue mist goes into a solid gray, silver gray figure. And there's this huge creature laying there next to the culvert, looking right at me. I'm 7 foot, 5 to 10, between 5 and 10 foot from this creature, and it's laying there looking right at me. It's got a huge thing of mane, like a line around its neck. The eyes look like they're real deep, tiny flashlights, solid clear. They're looking right at me. It has a snout with teeth. And it's just staring at me, and it looks like it's going to pounce on me like you see a cat do when it's after a mouse. And it's just crouched down like it's about to jump in the window on me. And about that time, I turned to Martin, and I said, "Are you seeing?" And before I could get the word out, he goes, "Oh, yeah, how can I not see that thing?" And this thing's staring at me, and I pull my arm in the window. I'm thinking, this thing's about to jump in the window and get me. Its head was about half the size of his truck windshield. And this thing gets up out of the ditch, and it goes back behind the truck, around the side, glides across the road behind Martin, and comes up to the left side of him, and it's walking through this field. And I can see this thing. It's probably about 8 foot long and big, heavy-looking thing, and it looks back at us, and I'm watching it, but the weird thing about it was I can see through it. I can see the creature, but I can see through the creature. It doesn't make no sense. It really doesn't. I've explained it like a cartoon figure before because it was real, but it was transparent at the same time. And we watched it go through that open field, go up through into the wood line, and we could hear it snapping limbs and breaking everything going up through there. And about that time, I realized that we had been zapped. And I've been zapped 3 times, twice by Bigfoot and once by Dogman. That was my first time by Dogman. And My legs were tingly. I felt sick at my stomach, but my chest was the weirdest thing. I felt like I had pressure on it and I had a headache. I looked over at Martin and he can't speak. He goes, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. And his throat had swelled together and his tongue had swelled up. And I was really concerned about him because he was trying his best to get air. He had some type of allergic reaction to it, and that had swelled, made him swell up like that. And we got a little ways down this gravel road, and I said, let me drive. You lay down in the truck. And he goes, oh, no, let's get out of here. And he turned out, and 2 or 3 miles away, we got into a lit area where a public restroom was in the middle of the park. And got out, and I got him moving around a little bit and got him some water, and he was a little better. But the whole inside of the truck smelled so bad that you could hardly even get in it. And I don't smell very well since my sense of smelling, I lost a lot of it since I had COVID in 2020. But it was so bad that he couldn't stand the smell. And Martin was sick for at least a week. He didn't recover as quick as I did. I was in pretty good shape on the way home, and by the next, we wanted him one home that morning because he was feeling really sick, and I didn't feel real good either. But that particular documentary, Small Town Monster, Seth Breedlove and Eli and Alexander and Heather was so good to us. We filmed that at LBL back last October, and it came out the last 2 months. The trailers have been out about one a month the last 5 months. But it's Joe and Jesse are on there with us too, and Elijah Henderson and my good friend Mike Smith, who's seen quite a few of those creatures too. But anyway, that was the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life. And people ask me all the time, what do you think it was? I don't think it was flesh and blood like the first one I seen. The first one I seen in Tazewell, Virginia, there's no doubt it was a dog creature that was flesh. This thing here, I don't know what it was. I don't know it was some kind of Dogman, but it had abilities like nothing like I'd seen because I don't know how you could see through it.
What are you supposed to do with that stuff, man? That's the kind of stuff that keeps you up at night. Because I mean, where do you put that? I personally think these things are, fallen angels or Nephilim, something in that realm, but nobody knows, man. And like you said earlier, nobody's an expert. We're just taking educated guesses off of what we're seeing and hearing. And you mentioned that when it got up and left there, it glided over to Martin's side.
Martin was looking through the rearview mirror, and he said, man, that thing didn't run across there. This was after the fact. It wasn't that night. It was after he got to feeling better. We just kept talking about it for months, talking about this, because we were weirded out by it. And he said, that thing didn't walk behind the truck. It glided. It just kind of glided right behind the truck, and I seen it glide out in the field. And, it was just the strangest thing I've ever seen. I don't even know how to explain it, really. The best way to explain it is what I did, but it was definitely a physical creature. But how do you see through this thing? It was evil looking. It was if you've ever seen a cat like ready to jump on a toy or a mouse or something, that's the way this thing was crouched down looking at me like it was going to jump on me. And I thought for sure it was going to. But I don't know. I can't explain what it is. People said, well, it was probably man-made. Maybe it was. I don't know.
You guys are really fortunate to be able to be here to share these encounters, in my opinion, man. I think these things are, like you said earlier, some of them are all right, but a lot of these things they have bad intentions, man. And I'm glad you were safe in that, and I'm glad Martin made it okay out of there, and he's better. That's it's pretty wild, man. What do you think kept you safe that night?
Well, I'm a firm believer of one thing, and Scott Carpenter taught me that, and so did Martin Groves. We got surrounded by Dogman. March of 21, I guess it was. It was me, Barton Unley, and Martin Groves. We had stayed in an area of the LBL. We were led there by kind of like a guide that knew the area and knew all the stories that had come out of there and knew about a lot of the encounters. And he said, this area right here is hot. And he goes, nobody has ever stayed here all night long because they're too afraid to because things that are happening. We stayed there all night long. So me, Martin, and Barton did. And that was the first time in my life that these dogmen were all around us. They surrounded us. We could hear them howling. We could hear them running through the woods. It got pretty frightening. I looked over it. We were sitting next to a campfire that we built, and I asked Barton, I said, "Are you ready? Because they're coming in." And he said, "I'm ready." And he had that sword he carries. And I said, "I hope you got something besides that sword." And he says, "No, I'm going to kill it with a sword if they come in." And this was another night that Martin had been zapped earlier that evening when we were eating dinner. He had his Suburban backed up right in next to us, and he was in the driver's seat with a seat laid back because he'd been sick. I'd taken him down to the restroom 3 times. He thought he was going to throw up because he got zapped when he was cooking the dinner. And we had seen a young Bigfoot on belly crawling when that happened. And then there was a Bigfoot to the left on top of the hill behind a huge cedar tree watching us. And that's when the Dogman started coming in. And the only thing that saved us that night, the reason why I'm going to this story, because for some reason, I have an ability with Bigfoot, and Martin Rhodes definitely has an ability with Dogman. They know him, they sense him, and I don't know why they do, but they do. And it's pretty strange, really, that he has that ability. But it got strong enough that I have no service in the LBL. One of my close friends, I can't call anybody. I can't get any service at all on my cell phone. And we're in this spot, and we call it spot number 23 because it's probably the craziest spot we've ever been in. And we camped there twice, that time and another time, and had crazy stuff happen both times we were there. And Beth Collinsworth, a good friend of mine, called me on my phone now. It's like 2:48 in the morning. We can hear these dogmen howling everywhere, and they're close. We heard them running across the water behind us where the water was shallow and across the lake. And I'm ready because I know they're coming in, and I'd never experienced anything like that. And Martin was ready too. And you're not supposed to, I don't mention carrying weapons when you go into that area, but you better have something if you're going to face those things. So, Beth calls me. I have no service. My phone rings at 2-something in the morning, and it's ringing. I'm looking at it. Martin's looking at me. Martin, how's your phone ringing? And I don't know. And I answered the phone. It was Beth Collinsworth. She's super intuitive. Very good friend of mine. Lives in Lebanon, Tennessee. Very good at intuitive stuff. And she didn't even know where I was at. She goes, "I know where you're at." I had not told her. I hadn't talked to her in a week or two. She goes, "I know you're in the LBL." She goes, "There's dog men all around you, and there's a feral man with them." And I said, "What are you talking about? How do you know all this?" She goes, "You know how I pick up things." She goes, "Whatever you do, you need to get out of there now. Y'all leave. Get Martin's truck and leave." And I said, "Okay, Beth, thanks." And she hangs up. Martin gets up, goes into the woods, and this is my whole point of this. Martin walks right into the woods with all these dogmen howling, and they're close. And he starts chanting a religious verse. And I'm talking about after he did that, I said, "Man, don't go in the woods by yourself." And I went running after him, and he just kept going. And he come out, and it got as quiet as a mouse. So we didn't hear another sound. You could have dropped a pin. And the dog man didn't come in. We didn't have no more action. And the same thing that Scott Carpenter told me in 2020 when the rogue Bigfoot attacked my farm. He taught me to rebuke them. Because these creatures, all of them know who Jesus Christ is for a reason. The Bigfoot know, the forest people know, the dogmen know. They know what Jesus Christ is, and if you have Jesus Christ in your heart, you can rebuke them to leave you and your family, or however you want to put your prayer. Scott told me I did mine, leave my farm, my family, and my property. I didn't say me, and leave my area. And I've been fighting these things for 2.5 months every night. A couple of rogue ones that were banging on my house and tearing up my stuff, killed all my cats. And I did that exactly like Scott told me, man, and I'm telling you, it was the strangest thing I've ever seen. Because he said, if you have Jesus in your heart, it will work. And I did it not once but twice. And that next day, after I'd been up for weeks, and the next night I was sitting there with my 270 automatic and my 357 Magnum in my hallway, waiting for them to come back, and they never came back.
I'll tell you, I'm a Christian. My faith is super important to me. And the longer I do this, the more I hear about these kind of encounters where people invoke the name of Jesus and they rebuke him and they leave because they know, you brought a good point, they know who he is. And that's some of the best advice for anybody listening tonight. If you're in a situation like that, man, that's exactly what you need to do, man. And that's amazing that Martin knew to do that and had the fortitude to do that, because that lady calling you, those things saved your life that night, man, in my opinion. Because, I mean, they're all around you. I mean, that's crazy.
That was probably the closest I've ever been to. I mean, you could hear these things howling, coming through the woods, running. I mean, it was so unreal how we could hear them. And, Barton Unley rebuked them. I don't know when it was. He rebuked them from him and anything that. We've had a rough time seeing things with Barton because of the rebuking. He kind of warded off, and when he goes with us sometimes, he doesn't see anything, and we do, and that's changed a little bit in the last year or two, but that went on for a long time. So, but it does work, and even the friendly ones that I was really close to on the Cumberland River in Cheatham County, Tennessee, they knew who Jesus Christ was. Well, they knew, but they knew who he was. I would ask them, "Do you know who Jesus Christ?" I'd ask them all kinds of stuff, but they knew who he was. So
that's really incredible, man. And there's so much in this world that we just, and I'll keep saying it, man, like we just don't understand. And man, you're very fortunate to have all these encounters. And I say fortunate because, you're seeing stuff that most people never see and you're still here to share it. But I got this thought, man, I've been thinking about, and I mention it from time to time. And it seems like if you've had an encounter with one of these creatures, your odds of having another one are really high. Like they go way up. And I don't know if it's because you're just aware of them or if there's something else to that. With somebody who's had as many encounters as you, and I know we could sit and talk about that all night long, but why do you think that is, man? If you've seen one, your chances of seeing another one are really high. Why do you think that is?
That's what I was going back to earlier. I think it has a lot to do with the way I grew up and my beliefs and what I believe in, and a lot of what my grandmother taught me. And she always told me that I had a special ability with certain things, and I really never understood any of that. Growing up as a kid, that goes in one ear and out the other. But
yeah.
I would always ask her what she meant by that. She said, the older you get, the more you understand that. And that's really the only answer I can give you, because I know other people, very few, but I do know some that have had quite a few encounters, and they seem like they have more than other people do too. I know for a fact, if you go in the woods, well, first of all, if you're looking for Bigfoot, you're doing the wrong thing. You're not ever going to find Bigfoot. He finds you. So if you think you can go out in the woods and start banging on trees and yelping and whooping and hollering and think you're going to find a Bigfoot, good luck, because I can tell you right now, you will see one if they want you to see them, unless you just absolutely stumble across one by accident and catch a glimpse of him for a second. And I think that's happened a few times, but these creatures are so intelligent, man. I have no doubt in my mind, when you get out of your car or your truck, and you might be 100 yards down the trail from where you're going in, they know that when you're there, they already know you're there. They've always got watchers, usually the juveniles, belly crawling up, and they're watching around a tree to see who's coming. Or even some older juveniles that do that too. Plus, they're super intelligent. Their eyesight is so good. I believe they can see you 100 yards, 200 yards away just as good as you and I can see 20 foot away. But their senses are a lot better. They smell things easier. I know they can smell gunpowder or smell a gun somehow. I'm figuring it must be the powder. But if you've got a gun or a camera, they're not going to let you see them. You might see them after you've learned from them and they trust you a little bit. If you build some trust. takes a long time to build trust with these creatures. That means you got to be around them a lot more, and they've got to give you the chance to build trust, and they don't always do that. So my guess is just what I said. That's all I can tell you. I do know other people that have seen quite a few of them, and there's something there. I know the good heart has a lot to do with it. I don't ever go in the woods thinking, well, I'm going to go shoot one. I go in the woods just wanting to, be around one or experience one or try to get to know one. Or, I also ground myself when I go in the woods. I do my little thing that's kind of silly for a lot of people, but I do that when I go in, and I thank our Father for the great forest and the vast experience He gives me to research and learn about these creatures, and be open-hearted, open-minded when you go in there, and they feel that too. I think they have a certain type of energy they look for in people.
And that's some good, solid advice, man. And I think you're spot on with that stuff. And for whatever the reason is, man, I think they can tell, like you said, what kind of person you are and what your intentions are. And so I agree with you. If you go out there looking for it, banging on trees and whatnot, you're probably never going to see one unless it's by accident. So I agree with you there, man. If somebody's listening to this podcast and they're not a believer, what would you say to them, man? What would you say to somebody who's not a believer listening to the podcast?
For a lot of years back when I really first started getting into this, and I really didn't really start researching until about by accident in '99 when I had my experience on the river with some of these creatures. And I wasn't looking for them; I just went fishing. But after that, from that time on, I was eat up with it for about 20-something years. That's all I wanted to do. I mean, it was just turned into my life. That was what I enjoyed doing. I wanted to learn as much as I could and learn as much as I could about them and try to understand them. And I wanted to know where they were from and if they could speak and everything. Just everything you can think of was in my mind to learn from them. But as far as, I guess, to answer the question for me would be, I think that sooner or later, we're all going to see more than we ever have, because I truly believe there's more of these creatures now than there ever was. And I heard somebody say, and don't hold me to this because I could be wrong, I believe it was the doctor that's out west. I'm trying to recall his name. Anyway, he made a statement on not long ago that he thought there was probably about 4,000 of these creatures in the United States. And I literally started laughing because I believe there might be 4,000 in Middle Tennessee. So, I don't really know where people come up with numbers, but I know there's a whole lot more of them now than there was when I started. And, more people are seeing them, more people are experiencing them because you got more people out in the woods looking for them, and you got more people that are serious about this. And plus, you got more people that aren't as scared to tell people they've seen them, too. So, I really don't know how to answer that question except like that.
That's a good answer, man. Really good answer. And I think that's just a matter of time to where, more and more of these things pop up. I hear encounters every day from people, man. Like, I get emails all day long from different people that are starting to come forward. And I think that there's a lot of these creatures out there, and people have just been so scared to talk about it for so long. And I would say, man, people just need to have an open mind, because we don't know what all is out there. And there's a lot of truth to these stories, and you know what you saw. I know what I saw when I had my encounter, and hopefully it'll give people the courage to come forward to talk about that. And I appreciate your time, man. I know you're busy. I know you're on a lot of different podcasts, but thank you very much, man, for sharing those encounters with my audience. I know they really enjoyed it.
I'm honored to be on. Thank you for having me, and I truly mean that. If you would keep prayer out, my brother Ron Moorhead's not feeling quite good today, and I worry about him when he's down a little bit, but he'll be all right. But if you would try to support him and his book, man, he's got a new book out that's fantastic, a new book that he just brought out. I was with him on the road 10 days in March while we were promoting it, and we were at the North Carolina and the Georgia conference together. And that and Martin Groves' new book comes out in about 2 weeks, and it's Beast Between the Rivers #3. The second one, I'm in the whole half a book on that one. This will be his third book. And
Awesome.
Barton Only's got 4 or 5 incredible books too. And those are my teammates, my research partners that I spend most all my time with when I'm in the woods, and have a great deal of trust for all of them. And that's the kind of people, if you're going to research, you need to be able to, somebody has to have your back.
That's some good points, man. And you got a good crew there. They're all good people, man. A lot of respect for those guys. I'll be praying for Ron, and I know my audience will be praying as well. And guys, make sure to check out their books. I'll try to drop the links in the description so you guys can go check them out and support those guys, because what they do for this community is really amazing. So again, thanks for your time. Thanks for being here, guys. I appreciate everybody who listens to this podcast. That was a good one. A lot to unpack there, and hopefully someday we can have him back on, man. And I'm just fortunate to sit here and do this and share these encounters with you. So thanks for all the support. If you have a mystery that you would like to send me, you can send it to me by email at mysteriesunknownpodcast@gmail.com. You know I'm going to say it. Stay prayed up. We'll see you in the next episode.